What's the most dangerous mission? Do you have any informants, for example? Has it ever happened to you to get burned? How come it's such a rarely practiced profession? What's the most baffling mission you've ever done? Do the transactions happen in a briefcase in a park without looking at each other or not?
Imagine having the chance to meet a private detective and ask any question you want without restrictions or taboos.
3 strangers came to exchange blindly with our guest.
Divided by a curtain, they can only hear, not see each other.
So there, it really came out of the principle of big American series, etc. But do you have informants, for example?
With whom you work. So yes, we have a network of people who have knowledge and who have access to information. Not forbidden, but facilitated, let's say, which remain public information, but facilitated. And we work regularly with them, especially for administrative research. Well, for example, when we are going to have family research to do, we can have genealogist contacts who will have access to archives, for example. It will be on research at the civil status level, at the real estate level, etc. Generally, yes, these are not people we find on the street. Then I know there are detectives who will work with more or less legal sources, in fact, more illegal than legal. That is to say, people who will work, let's suppose, at Électricité de France and who will have access to listings, which is forbidden in itself.
But do the transactions happen in a briefcase, in a park, without looking at each other or not?
No.
It happens at our office. And so I also wanted to know, what is the most dangerous mission you
have participated in? Undoubtedly a mission where a woman contacted us for a child custody issue. Since her ex-partner, wanting to get custody of the children, lied about his place of work and his overall life situation, about where he lived and where he worked. In reality, he was unemployed and didn't reside where he claimed. But this man, in fact, was particularly known to the police for arms trafficking, drug trafficking, and violence towards his wife, his ex-wife. In this case, we closed the file after proving everything necessary, except that our investigation reports are nominative, meaning that we can hardly anonymize them. They are signed with our name, otherwise there is at least the stamp of the agency behind, so the opposing party, when it understands that it has been the subject of an investigation. When the investigation report can turn against us, that is to say that the man in question contacted me to say, yeah, it's you, the detective there, who had followed me, don't worry, I will find you, you are at such a place, I will come, etc. We still take these risks. Attacking a detective today is an aggravating circumstance. Incidentally, he is trying to get custody of his children, so he won't go too far either. He had also threatened my client's lawyer. He was known for that too, but it didn't go any further.
I have a question. As a civilian, I often witness situations that highlight the limitations and lack of follow-up from the police when we call on them for assistance. Consider domestic violence. We often can't act because we're unaware of the situation or feel powerless to change the status quo. Would it be possible, for example, to mandate a private detective specifically in the context of a suspicion of domestic violence?
Absolutely. We often get requests, not necessarily, well, also for domestic violence, but also, for example, for cases of harassment, where we have clients who tell us, well, I went to the police, but in fact, I have so little evidence of harassment that basically they don't even accept my complaint. Although they lack the right to reject a complaint, it is what it is. In one case, a woman's ex had placed a spy microphone in her wardrobe to eavesdrop on her private conversations in her room. She required further assistance after this discovery. It's the fact of having found that which allowed her to go to the police with it so that they could then identify the equipment and everything.
Is it a cliché that most investigations are often about deception? More and more, yeah?
Because we don't just have that as a case. And today I would say that in my case, stories of adultery, of deception, maybe represent 25% of my cases. The rest is, for individuals, it's going to be about disappearance, about searching for missing people. It's going to be cases of harassment. It's going to be in the context of a divorce, issues of income concealment. In short, it's very broad. We also work for businesses, for example, in unfair competition, in theft, internally, in data search, for example. And then we will work, for example, for town halls who have municipal police, but who cannot do investigations. Well, they call on detectives for stories of urban degradation, for example, or wild garbage dumps, or to monitor municipal agents who would work under the table.
Has it ever happened to you sometimes you're investigating something on a case maybe that seems mundane or an adultery or I don't know, and in the end you stumble upon something hardcore or 10 times worse or a dirty business or I don't know, you see?
Yeah. Yes, it happens often. We've had many cases with colleagues who were mandated for adultery stories, who follow the person, in this case, a woman, into her building to her apartment. There's no one in her apartment, there's only her dog and her...
What? Understood what? Finish your sentence, dude.
Meaning that the client didn't understand because he was convinced that he had been cheated. Well, I don't know if we can call it cheating per se, but so wait.
Finish your sentence, brother. What?
Around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, my colleague on site started to hear particularly ambiguous, no unambiguous noises, and in fact he had sex with his dog, Jay.
Listen to your sentence.
In fact,
generally we don't make a report on this weight. You have an appointment with your client. What do you say? We don't make an investigation report on this, meaning it's not going to court. The client is not going to tell the judge in court, sir, she's cheating on me with my dog.
first of all, it's illegal to sleep with your dog.
To start with, so I hope...
Although there is an investigation report and then it goes on.
How does it happen?
What do you tell the client face to face?
After that, it's not a case I handled. It's my colleague who handled it.
I don't know how he...
Announced it to him, but in my opinion... You can imagine... Yes, I suppose he took it badly, but...
No, but can you imagine having the neck? You have to... Well, listen, sir, there you go. Adultery, it's a dog. He's going to laugh. He's going to say... Honestly.
But you see, that's also why in detective training you also have psychology classes. There are also classes of
Psychology.
because whether it's for the paranoid clients we might have or precisely to announce a situation, you need to be able to show empathy, to be able to explain things without the person going into I'm going to break everything mode and that's it.
So what's the most improbable request you've ever had?
I received a request that I refused due to its improbability. In fact, it's important to know that among our clients, we have many people who may have psychological disorders, who may be paranoid, who call detectives because they are convinced they are being followed, convinced they are being spied on, convinced of all that. Sometimes it can be true, but sometimes when we have them on the phone and we hear their speech, we realize how disjointed and implausible it is. And I indeed had the case of a woman who called me because everywhere she went, she found paper clips and rubber bands. She found it suspicious and she was convinced she had dismantled a mafia network. She had gone to the police, but at the police they radiated, and on the ground she found a paperclip. She believed the police were involved. So yes, we have quite a few impressive requests like that.
I wanted to ask you, first of all, what's the funniest role you've had to play? Are you good at it? Are you stressed? I mean, how is it? I'm just saying anything. You have to go track a woman who is in the hammam. You have to put on a wig, a little swimsuit. You see what I mean?
My mother's children, and then hello.
I am here for the hammam.
No, actually, we're not going to go that far. And then, if you want, we work in collaboration with other detectives. And each one,
A little.
its qualities, its advantages, its assets compared to others. The adrenaline, yeah, it's there all the time. Even if you don't put yourself in scenarios, etc. But the simple fact of being in your car for 6 hours, waiting to half fall asleep, and then you have the person coming out of their house, and you start the car tailing, there you have the adrenaline starting, but depending on the situation, we will call on investigators, for example, who blend in super well in the suburbs, or to investigators who have rather a career of former cop, or to women. Because precisely, typically, I am associated with a female colleague who will be able to pass much more easily in places, whether it be more feminine gyms or, as you said, the hammam, for example. There you go. So it's very good when it comes to someone who is going to walk their dog. We go there with the dog. It really makes you paranoid, and even more so when you're two and when you're a man and a woman. Nobody suspects the couple.
In the context of your job, you can have weapons. Are you equipped with them?
No, absolutely not. Like any citizen at this level, we do not have the right to carry weapons. We do. Private security personnel, such as armed security guards, are part of the private security sector. But we are a minority in this sector, and we do not have the right to that at all.
But then exactly, has it ever happened to you to get burned?
Yes. Once. Detectives often get burned because of their clients. Because, for example, we'll be on a mission and the client will lose it and tell his wife, anyway, I'm having you followed. And we're in hiding at that moment. And so, for me, the time I got caught, precisely, it was from the first day of the investigation. We had just accepted the case. It's a man who contacted us for an adultery case to follow his wife. They no longer live together, but well, they were still married. We start the investigation. First day, she comes out of her dead end. We were parked much further away. She drives slowly. She gets to our level. She stops and she looks at us through the window. I pretend like I'm playing Mario, and then she leaves. I tell myself, well, I'm going to let it pass. For 5 minutes. Then I will resume the tailing a little later. I try to catch up with her. We go on the highway. 5 minutes later, I realize she is behind me. So, well, then I hang up, I go to another place, I call the client and I ask him, but your wife, is she suspicious or what? And in fact, little by little, I learned that the client had already had her followed by other detectives. Before me, and before calling in detectives, he was following her himself. And then he asked his buddies to follow her, and then he had put a global positioning system tracker under her car, and incidentally, the father of the woman in question was a cop. So we stopped everything. We halted everything after realizing the man wasn't investigating suspicions of adultery, but was harassing his wife, wanting to know her every move at all times. So naturally, even from the first day we get caught, with such a client, it's bound to happen.
All detectives are autonomous, or there are large structures where there are 1,000 detectives, and so it's a bit like detective offices.
1,000 detectives is roughly the number of detectives there are in France. So there won't be any large structures like that, and indeed, most detectives are self-employed. There are very few employees in the profession, and when we work in collaboration, it's subcontracting in a collaboration contract, but most are self-employed.
On investigations that are often around love affairs, etc., does the person you are investigating often have the profile of the cheater or the typical profile? No.
But then indeed, these are the profiles to whom you could give the good God without confession, whom you imagine totally innocent. We have had people we were following who were 80-year-old grandfathers who, in fact, were seeing prostitutes or indeed were leading a double life on the side, maintaining a relationship with another woman, etc. Sometimes even these are people who play it up in front of the judges, who seem all nice, but who in fact are making their wife, their spouse, live a nightmare. We have clients who are in tears in our place because they are questioning themselves. They think, oh, it's my fault. I went to see a psychologist because it might be because of me. I'm not satisfying my husband, etc. To make them understand that, no, they also need to pull themselves together. And if there's something wrong, either they discuss it, indeed, they lay things out with their husband, or they take matters to court.
In this scenario, I suspect the guy I'm seeing, not my husband, of cheating on me. So I call you, I know nothing about detectives. I would like to conduct the investigation to know if he's cheating on me. How much does it cost and how does the price vary as well? All of that.
Generally, detectives cost between 70 euros and 110 euros per hour. Depending on the age of the firm, if there are multiple agents, the difficulty of the mission, if it's at night, if it's... In short, it depends on a lot of things, but it varies within that range. So it might cost maybe 400 euros.
Yeah, I might as well buy a wig, actually. 1,000 detectives, that's very few. How come it's such a little practiced profession? Because it's not well known.
When I talk about my job or when I introduce myself to both business leaders and individuals, the first reactions I get are, does that really exist? Or is it really legal? As if we were still spies, you see. But no, it's too little known. Even you and many others can't imagine that there is a university education to become a detective.
What are the usual requests you receive? By whom? Is it by official bodies, as you say? So by justice, by the police? Or is it more by individuals who will want to settle personal matters?
It's a major misconception about our profession. We intervene for both individuals and businesses. Either they directly mandate us, or it's their lawyer. We occasionally collaborate with bailiffs, and cases can end up in court, such as for divorce proceedings, where a court decision is required.
Why would we mandate a private detective instead of a police officer?
Because we don't do the same thing. Typically, the police officer, you imagine that he does criminal law. That is to say, there are crimes, there are offenses. He is the one who will intervene. We do civil and commercial law. That is to say, you're not going to call the police for an adultery case. You're not going to call the police to find a missing person. You're not going to call the police. A company is not going to call the police when there are suspicions of unfair competition, for example. Generally, therefore, a request from the time you receive the request to the time the case is considered resolved, how long does an investigation last approximately? It's extremely variable. So let's say on average between 2 to 4 weeks. 50% of our work, it happens in the car, waiting. Something that potentially will never happen, but waiting without being able to go to the bathroom, without being able to take the time to go out, buy a sandwich or anything.
In this job, having to follow people, tailing them, is it a bit like in the movies where you literally have to make yourself invisible, disguise yourself, etc., or, I don't know, have a newspaper with 2 holes maybe? And if that's the case, do they teach you how to do it at school or what? Or is it you on your own, or do you not do it at all?
Yeah, we have practical work classes where we make holes in newspapers.
No, I tricked you.
While it's not entirely true that detective training involves newspapers with holes, the curriculum does include law classes and surveillance courses, both on foot and by car. By the way, for the training I did, it was in partnership with the School of
Gendarmerie.
Yeah, we have tailing courses by car, on foot. We are taught to be discreet. We are taught to position ourselves properly so as to be able to see without being seen.
Well, now we're going to talk post-P, but also going to eat, etc. How do you manage, first of all, to make sure no one sees you and to be hidden, you know?
So first of all, we prepare a whole intervention, meaning, for example, we've had interventions in the middle of December at 5 in the morning. We can't use the heating or air conditioning, so we prepare blankets. We prepare an empty bottle to be able to evacuate. We prepare evacuees. We prepare sandwiches, cakes, donuts, and so on. We make sure we lack nothing so we can basically live like a hermit in the car, in the investigations car.
In the investigations, you really put yourself personally into the character, meaning that some characters may not suit some private detectives. That's exactly it.
For the record, we have male detectives, female detectives, rather street detectives, detectives who are very sharp on everything that will be rather art history, etc., and who will be able to intervene in these areas. Former police officers who have a particular stature and young people who come from the world of cybersecurity and who will have this knowledge rather on that. Everyone has their skills. If it's necessary to intervene in a city for some issue or for selling slightly shady fashion accessories, we'll call certain colleagues to handle those scenarios.
I find that precisely domestic violence, it's a societal problem, and women and precisely feminist associations, feminist movements denounce a lot the limits of justice in the face of domestic violence because it's in the private sphere, because there are no material proofs, etc. So I wonder why it wouldn't be systematic that we call precisely on private detectives, because the police can't start following a man, for example, who has a restraining order, or I don't know. You can be very useful in cases where you notice a woman leaving her house with bruises everywhere, a broken cheekbone and other injuries. So would it be possible that
Private detectives are not systematically mandated in these situations for several reasons. The first reason is financial, since detectives are private. Can you imagine having a detective 24/7 for 6 months? It would cost a huge amount. And then for the second reason, well, you said it yourself, we're not doctors. Yes, if you want, we can come and see that there's a bruise around her eye when she leaves her house, but she would have much more ease going to a doctor who examines her and who can note the bruises, etc. that there might be, and who can write her a report about it.
in your profession, do you think it's easier to be a male or female detective? Why?
Because they are suspected much less than men, because they are much more discreet, because they can more easily change their appearance by letting their hair down, dyeing their hair, etc., than men. Because we
Have often been used to having male private detectives. Absolutely. Even in movies, God is often represented by a man.
Yes, exactly. When you're being followed by a woman, I don't think you imagine that it could be a private detective.
In the context of the video we're shooting right now with Origine, isn't it counterproductive to your job as a detective? Because now, since it's a media that's almost worldwide, everyone will recognize you saying, "Ah, but it's him who made the Origin video about the detective."
That's a good question I get asked, but very, very, very often, especially on TikTok. There are several things. The first is that the goal for a detective is to see without being seen. We seldom contact our targets. When we do surveillance, whether on foot or by car, we are at a distance, we are far away, especially by car. When we go to do administrative research, we're not even in the field, but there you go. And we must also say that fundamentally, people are still relatively nondescript. We see a lot of people on social networks, and I doubt that on the street, like that someone turns around saying, "Ah, it's the detective," and even if...
What is the most disconcerting mission?
That you could do, the most disconcerting mission we had to do is indeed a client who called us because every night around 3 in the morning, he hears strange noises, he sees bright flashes. He can't explain it, and sometimes he finds his fence is smashed. So he asked us to intervene, to come around 3 in the morning to understand what it's all about. In this case, he lives in a small house, in a small hamlet with just a cemetery next to it. So we went there with my colleague who indeed wondered if it could come from the cemetery or not. We go there at 3 in the morning and there is nothing, no noise, no light. However, at one point a man enters and exits the cemetery. And in fact, this man was the client who apparently was a sleepwalker. When we told him at 3 o'clock in the morning, he denied it completely, saying it was impossible and not him, despite the photographic evidence. And that's it. It ended. We stopped the file directly because we understood that it was a bit complicated file, but that's it.
Have you ever refused an investigation or refused something because for you it was going too far or it was far-fetched?
You are absolutely right that this happens very often. That is to say, people who have psychological problems, who suffer from paranoia in particular, by default already, these are the people most likely to think of a detective. Most importantly, they will first approach the police, for instance. When they approach the police, they are often turned away, so they resort to hiring private detectives. So we regularly get calls, indeed, from clients who are convinced they are being followed, who hear noises every day. We had a case of a person who told us, "I am convinced that my upstairs neighbor comes to spray with a squirt of poop on my..."
Bastard!
And I tell him, "Well, okay, did you go to file a complaint for harassment or for degradation, etc.?" They came and examined the door but didn't find anything, so that's what happened. The client was convinced that the police were involved. The neighbor was familiar with the police, so they asked us to intervene. We came, we didn't feel anything either. You are there.
Went into inventory mode, poop, you quote on the door.
How is it?
No, but actually, we even suggested that he hide in the stairwell to see the moment when the neighbor would come.
Quote, poop, poop.
There you go. Except that the client tells us no, but they know you're there, they're not going to come specifically that day, etc.
In fact, there is always one.
Good excuse for why nothing happens. The danger of accepting this kind of mission is that we could either be seen as part of the plot and face harassment, or be reported to the police by those who hired us, claiming they called detectives, but we failed to deliver.
Me, that's it.
So we don't want that. Or we could also be accused of taking advantage of people who are psychologically weak, and we are trying to extract money from them. We could very well tell them, okay, 2,000 euros, don't worry, we will prove that there is nothing, but no, we don't do that. So yes, there are a lot of cases that we reject like that.
And so sometimes do you find yourself facing cases
That you can't handle.
Solver, yes, it happens. So either because precisely there is nothing simply, that is to say that I will be assigned to an adultery investigation, but in fact everything is fine. Or because an administrative search, the person is a ghost or who has left France, or we have no data on that, or it's a foreign person precisely who will not have a civil status in France, and we will have trouble finding their trace. And generally, so as not to cost the clients too much, either we give up or we tell them to turn instead to a detective in such and such a country where he will have more ease.
So, concretely, do you work more for the good guys or the bad guys, so to speak?
I believe in our profession there are no good guys, there are no bad guys. There are people who play and lose.
That was a punchline.
What are the qualities required to be a good detective, and what advice could you give to all the people watching us who want to be a detective? About the qualities.
To begin with, curiosity is essential. To be a detective, you have to be curious. Actually, no. In my opinion, it's not at all the main quality. I would say patience, obviously, but above all, adaptability. You always adapt to any situation. You manage to have, let's suppose you get caught. You can smoothly come up with a scenario to explain why you're there, why you've been waiting in your car for 4 hours, why you're knocking on doors in a building, etc. The main quality is the ability to quickly adapt when the target suddenly changes behavior, such as turning around and circling around about 3 times by immediately thinking about how to react in that moment. You, before doing this little show, what did you imagine when someone says private detective to you? What was it?
It's true that I was always a bit in the imagination, in the side of the detective who is always in surveillance, always disguised with the raincoat, a cap with things on the ears, a poncho, magnifying glass. With a big mistake and behind you have cameras. No, I have no idea. With the voice, from what I could interpret, I rather imagine someone tall, quite slender. I would say without a beard, without a mustache. I don't know why. I imagine that if you go on a stakeout, you're going to add a mustache, so I imagine there isn't one. You're here, you're brown, but not too dark brown. You're...
Chestnuts?
Maybe you have a little beard. You're here laughing, so I must be out of it. I'm not questioning your beauty, but I think you need a more subtle profile. To blend into the crowd, I can't imagine a guy dressed all in leopard or with a cape. But yeah, indeed, I have no idea.
And what did you imagine about the profession of detective before coming here?
Me, honestly, very honestly, I thought it was much more about individuals. By definition, I believed private detective work was primarily... Adultery, by definition, involves real legal issues that I did not imagine, which demystifies it. A bit the profession which is very little practiced today.
Now I'm going to stand up and introduce myself to Julian, so he can get a glimpse of the reality of being a detective. Let's go. There you go.
Mr. Everyman Brain, the little beard, you had...
Absolutely right. Ah, yeah, I
Didn't give myself that at all.
didn't imagine it at all, no. Me neither.
This.
Said, yeah, handsome guy, what? You could be a detective, thank you. Would you cross me on the street? No, not at all.
Not at all.
Oh, that's what people don't necessarily imagine. It's true that we imagine someone tall.
Yeah, that's true. Machine, now I think it's the side of films often that puts tall people and launched all that.